And greetings, kings and queens. Welcome back to the Always a Queen, the Metamorphosis platform. I am chuckling because the broadcast hasn't even started, and people are cracking me up in the comment section. Greetings to the persons who are already in the chat section of this evening's broadcast. I see you, D. What's the early bird prize, you ask? See me after the broadcast and we'll discuss that. Thank you for being the early bird today, Dee. Thank you so much for tuning in. Greetings to our queens, Serene, and to Irie Sister. And of course, to all of the persons who are listening and watching me right now, wherever you are, if you're watching on Facebook, on YouTube, or on Twitter. Thank you so much for being here. And if you happen to be in the crowd who will be watching this broadcast later on, you'll be watching the recording on the Facebook platform. I want to give you a shout out as well. Thank you for your continued support of the Always a Queen, the Metamorphosis platform. Thank you for being here today. Greetings, queens. Anju and Saran, thank you for joining in. Thank you for being here today. And Valerie, I see you as well. Thank you all for dropping in for today's broadcast. So, today is part one of a holiday series that I decided to do. I think this is the first time I have ever done something like this. I don't recall ever doing a holiday series before. I was moved to do this holiday series this year for several reasons, not the least of which is that we are just coming out on the other side of a global pandemic. And during the pandemic, as we all know, there was a lot of loss. There was a tremendous amount of loss. And I think that it is timely to touch on topics like these. For one, we don't talk about topics like these enough. And two, it is a time where people are still grieving losses that are very, very fresh. And so I thought it would be a good idea to do a holiday series that touches on topics that people rarely discuss, like the one that we will tackle today. This is going to be a 4-part series. Today being part one. And today we are going to be talking about grieving during the holiday season. I know that the holidays are supposed to be joyful and very celebratory occasions, and this is not an attempt to undermine the celebratory spirit in any way. It is merely an attempt to not overlook the fact that there are a lot of people who struggle to celebrate during the holiday season because it is also a period of intense grief for them. And we often just kind of overlook that. We expect people to just kind of suck it up and move on and push through. And it's not that easy for some people. And so we want to acknowledge that. And so that is the intent behind this holiday series. So I designed this 4-part series, which I will encourage you to log in for the next 4 Sundays, including today, where we will talk about grieving during the holiday season, setting boundaries during the holiday season, another thing that many of us struggle with. We want to also talk about things that we want to leave behind in 2022. It's a package that is going to touch on a lot of things that people are challenged to tackle at this time of the year. And so join me for the next 4 Sundays. And incidentally, this will also be the last set of broadcasts for 2022. We are going to wrap it up with this series and say goodbye until next year. So don't miss out on the last 4 broadcasts of the year. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about grieving during the holiday season. Um, so, firstly, I will say that memories are often constant reminders of loss, right? And I want to qualify what I mean when I talk about loss, because I think that there is a prevailing narrative that we all buy into, not because of any fault of our own, but just because this is what we've always been taught. There is a prevailing narrative that loss is only associated with death, and that grief is only associated with death. And so I want to start off today by saying that when we talk about grief and loss today, or when I talk about grief and loss today, I am not just referring to death. So let's put that out there to start. Grief is not just applicable to death. Grief is applicable to loss in general. And so we don't want to start off today by thinking, well, this does not apply to me because, I am not grieving the death of anybody. I haven't lost anybody to death who is close to me. So this perhaps is not applicable to me. That is not the case at all. If you are grieving anything or anyone, whether it is due to death or any other type of loss, grief is grief. For example, there may be persons who are struggling with grief this holiday season who may be coming out on the other side of a divorce. And if you are recently divorced, you will be grieving. That is also grief. That is a significant loss to your life. And so you will grieve. So loss isn't just about death. Loss is loss, period. If you have lost someone who formed a very significant part of your life and who meant a great deal to you, you're going to grieve them, even if they are still very much alive. And here's another thing. I like to say to my clients all the time that sometimes it is actually more difficult to grieve someone who is still alive than to grieve someone who is dead. I think it might be the most painful type of grief, to grieve someone who is still very much alive, but who will never ever be a part of your life ever again. That is an excruciating type of grief by itself. And so I don't want anybody to exclude themselves from this because they feel like they have not had to deal with the death of a loved one. Grief is not just applicable to death. Grief is applicable to loss, period. So let's get that out there. One of the things that I think makes celebratory occasions like holidays particularly hard for persons who are grieving is the fact that they are watching other people celebrate. If you were sitting alone, it probably would not be as bad, but it is compounded and exacerbated by the fact that holidays are often spent in social settings. That's how our society is set up. If it's a holiday, you have to socialize. You have to be surrounded by people. There has to be lots of food and lots of music and lots of laughter and all of those things. And watching other people celebrate and thinking to yourself that everybody else is fine and that you are not, serves to exacerbate whatever pain you are feeling. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you are like, you're watching other people celebrate and you're maybe even a little angry and resentful about how happy they are and how unhappy you are, that is absolutely normal. It is an absolutely normal occurrence. And so I don't want you to feel like there is something wrong with you because you may be feeling a little resentful of the people around you who are happy and laughing and smiling while you are thinking, shouldn't we all be sitting here miserable and crying because whoever it is no longer here, right? We have to understand that we do not all grieve in the same way, and I'm going to come to that in a moment, but I just wanted to say that you have to hold space for people to grieve in whatever way works best for them. And everybody's grief will not look the same as yours, right? And in the same way, we expect that others will hold space for however you choose to grieve the loved one that you have lost, right? So, the first step I would like to touch on is the fact that the first holiday after losing someone is usually the hardest. I know there may be people listening to me right now who may be approaching what is the very first holiday season after a loss. And this is typically the hardest for survivors of loss. It does get easier. But I have to tell you that you should brace yourself for what is going to be the very first holiday season without whoever that person is. It is usually the most difficult one. Why is it the most difficult one? It's the most difficult one because you have not yet learned how to develop new holiday rituals and new traditions and all of the things that you would normally have done with that person. You have not yet managed to kind of replace those things and find alternatives, or you have not yet had the opportunity to see what it feels like to do those things without that person. So everything is going to be a first. It's going to be a first time doing things without them. It's going to be a first time trying to create new traditions without them. It's going to be a first time seeing what it feels like to celebrate without them. And so all of that makes the very first holiday the most difficult one. But I promise you, it does get easier. I promise you that it does get easier. I see Marianne on here. Greetings, Marianne. Marianne says she is not hearing. I am not sure why you are not hearing. Perhaps check the settings on your device. But if there's anybody who is not hearing me, just let me know in the comment section. All right. So next, acknowledge that the first holiday is going to be difficult. And that doing all of the things that you normally do is going to be difficult. I think also the anticipation of the holiday is hard. For some people, the anticipation of the holiday it might be harder than the actual holiday. I have had to work with clients who have more anxiety in the month leading up to Christmas than they actually have on Christmas Day. Like on Christmas Day, they're actually calm and able to cope pretty well because they have gathered whatever skills and tools they needed. But the weeks leading up to the holiday are are riddled with anxiety because not knowing what to expect is often harder than actually going through the holiday that you would have spent with that person. And so sometimes the anticipation of the holiday is more difficult than the day itself. And so I wanted to put that out there as well. And so if you feel like you are already having anxiety and you're like, oh my goodness, it's not even Christmas Day yet. We are a whole month away from Christmas Day, and I am already feeling all of the symptoms of anxiety, the heart palpitations, the nervousness in the tummy, the tremors, the weepiness, and all of the other things that accompany grief. Normal, perfectly normal. All right. I wanted to throw that in as well. Anticipation of the holiday can sometimes be more difficult than the holiday itself. Now, I want to take greetings to Licia. Thank you for being here. And I see Marianne says she switched her device and she's hearing now. Wonderful. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about grief itself. I think it is important to understand what grief looks like in order to truly be able to cope well with it. And a lot of people do not quite understand what the grief process looks like, which is why many of us expect everybody to grieve in the same way. We also sometimes have this expectation, an unrealistic expectation that people are going to grieve for a certain period of time as well. Like we believe that after a certain period of time has passed, that people should stop grieving. You know, like we have a thing like she should be fine by now, or he should be fine by now. Why is he still, crying so much? Like what? That is not okay. And so we tend to put certain limitations on people and how much time they should require to grieve. And so I want to say that no two people grieve the same. How you grieve is how you grieve. It may not look like how another person grieves. We have got to hold space for persons to grieve in the way that best suits them. That's super important. Now, I am not suggesting that anybody should be grieving endlessly and never ever get over a death. And speaking of that, I was having a conversation about this. It's an interesting analogy that someone shared with me that I really wanted to just throw in, because people ask all the time if you stop grieving or if you just get accustomed to your grief. Does the grief truly go away, or do you just learn to live with it? This is a question that people often ask me. And I like to say that when you get to a place of acceptance, it's not that the grief has necessarily disappeared, but that you have learned to kind of build your life around it. And in conversation with a friend of mine about this very topic some time ago, my friend said to me that in his view, he thinks that grief always stays with you, it never goes away. But what happens is that as your life continues, you build on top of that grief. And so, with each new experience and each new memory and each new relationship that comes into your life over time, what happens is more and more things get piled on top of that grief. And the further down it's buried, the easier it is to live with. And I love that analogy because I feel like that is such an apt description for what happens to us as human beings. I do not believe that grief truly just goes away and leaves you. I do believe, and this is not just my clinical perspective, but also my personal perspective. I am of the view that grief stays with you. It does stay with you. I think that you grieve your loved ones always, as long as you have lost someone that was truly meaningful to you. However, I believe that you do reach a place of acceptance. And when you reach acceptance, you are able to build your life around that grief and move on. You have accepted that that person is no longer here, and you learn how to navigate life without them. And you can even learn to navigate life happily without them. But that loss remains with you. That's how I personally think that this works, right? Um, and so, do you continue to grieve your loved one? The short answer is yes. The short answer is yes. You're never going to forget them. And it is possible that after 50 years, you can remember them and still shed tears. And that is grief. But it will not be a grief that is making you dysfunctional. It will not be a grief that is making it impossible for you to move forward, to live your life, to celebrate, to be happy, and to have a fulfilling and satisfactory existence. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be a grief that just kind of stays there and sits, as my friend said, beneath all of the other beautiful memories that you will continue to build throughout your life. Right? Now let's talk about what happens in order for you to get to that acceptance, because that's important. Now, when doing grief counseling, we usually work with a model that is called the Kubler-Ross model. Some of you may have heard of it. This is not the only grief model that exists, but it is probably the most common one that is used in clinical settings. I encourage you to read up on it when you have some time. It's called the Kubler-Ross model. Now, the Kubler-Ross model, like I said, is probably the most common one that you will find being used in clinical settings. And the Kubler-Ross model teaches that there are 5 stages in grief. The 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Let me say that again. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Okay? Acceptance always being the very last stage for obvious reasons, right? The first and most important thing to know about the Kubler-Ross model is that these stages are not linear, meaning that they do not necessarily have to occur in any specific order. The fact that I listed them in the order that I did doesn't mean that that is exactly how it will happen. So you should not expect that it's just going to be a very straight, linear, organized process. And I'm going to go through denial first, and then anger, and then bargaining, and then depression. And then finally, I will reach acceptance and I will be done with my grieving and all will be well. Not quite how it works. Grief tends to be a very chaotic, messy process. And so these stages do not necessarily occur in any particular order. You may find yourself, in fact, going from one stage to another and then back, and then to another and then back. You may start off with denial, and you have a period where you are in denial, and then you snap out of that and you go into bargaining, and then you are in that phase for a while and you snap out of bargaining, and then you find yourself being in anger, and then you are in there for a while and snap out of that, and then you find yourself in depression, and then you may be back to denial, and you can find yourself in a cycle for a while, dealing with one stage or another of grief for a period of time, just cycling through, sometimes up, sometimes down, until eventually you come to the point of acceptance. I could never sit here and tell you how long you may be cycling through the stages of grief. I could never, because that looks different from one person to the other. So I cannot say, you know what, you'll be cycling through for a year, or you'll be cycling through for 6 months or 3 months. You will cycle through for as long as it takes you to cycle through to get to the acceptance stage. And you eventually do get to the acceptance stage as long as you are in a normal grief cycle. And I'm going to talk about what happens if it's not a normal grief cycle, because that is also a thing. Okay. Now, as you are cycling through, it is a good idea for you to be cognizant of what is happening to you, because many times people are cycling through stages of grief, and because they are unaware that they are in a grief cycle, they figure that something must be wrong with them. Like, why am I depressed sometimes and then other days I'm fine? Or why am I always angry? What is wrong with me? Everything annoys me. Everything is triggering me. I don't understand what is going on. Many times it is just grief. It's just grief. You are angry because you are in that particular stage of grief at that moment. And you are cycling through, and perhaps you may pass through that stage and move on to another stage where you are depressed for a while, and then you bypass that and you find yourself back in the denial phase, or you go to bargaining. Bargaining, by the way, this is, I people ask me all the time what bargaining is, because nobody's usually able to figure out what that one is. The others are kind of self-explanatory. Bargaining is, for example, if I have lost somebody and I find myself constantly doing the, if I had done this, what if I had said that? If I had shown up earlier, this person would still be here. If I had not been doing this, that person would not have died. If I have said X, that person would not have left. Or you might be bargaining with God. God, if you do this, I will do that. If you heal this person, I will do, if you do this, I will do that. And this is the bargaining. It's the would have, should have, could have, maybe, if I had, maybe if he had, if she had, I don't know. All of that is bargaining. And so if you find yourself in a space where you are doing that, that is also a stage of grief, which we call bargaining. If I had shown up earlier, he would not have died. If I was driving slower, he would not have died. If I had not said X or did Y, he or she would not have left. And so that is the bargaining that we sometimes find ourselves doing. It is just another stage of grief, and it is perfectly normal. If you find yourself doing a lot of that, it's okay. Give yourself room to grieve. Give yourself room, give yourself time, give yourself grace and compassion, and allow yourself to grieve. Now, I did say that this is what a normal grief cycle should look like, because there is what we refer to as complicated grief as well. Complicated grief is a clinical term that we use to describe a situation in which somebody is grieving, but they find themselves stuck in that cycling phase that I described. And this sometimes happens where somebody is going through the varying stages of grief, and basically they get stuck there. Like, they're literally stuck, and they just never are able to get the traction that they need in order to move into the acceptance phase of the grief cycle. And as a result of being stuck in the cycling phase, they start becoming dysfunctional. Like, the grief becomes complicated, as we say, and it begins to make it difficult for you to do the very basic things that you normally have to do in order to live a healthy, functional life. You cannot go to work. You can't look after your children. You can't look after yourself. Your health begins to fail, and all kinds of things resulting from a very unhealthy, complicated grief situation. If you are cycling through the grief, to the stages of grief, and you are stuck in any particular stage for a period of time that is so long, like a protracted period of time that is long enough to begin to make your life dysfunctional, then we start labeling that as complicated grief. Like it's going a little further than you just being in a mood. It is getting to a point where it is literally impeding your ability to live a healthy life. That we will label as complicated grief. And if you find yourself in a situation where you have complicated grief or you're dealing with complicated grief, my recommendation, my strong recommendation is to get help. Seek help, because if you find yourself in a situation of complicated grief, what typically happens if you do not get the help that you need to kind of pull you up, help you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, so to speak, you begin to spiral. And it is typically a downward spiral and not an upward spiral, as in the potential for things to get worse is much greater than the potential for things to get better, right? I see. Oh, this is a good question. This is a good question. D is asking, how about grieving someone who's toxic to you? Is that normal? The short answer to that is yes. Yes, it is normal. First thing I'm going to say is this: grief is grief. As I said at the start, grief is grief. If you have lost something or someone that meant a great deal to you, you will grieve. Period. The fact that the person was toxic does not mean that it was not a loss. Because how many times do we love, truly, deeply love people who are toxic and who are no good for us? That happens all the time. That is an everyday occurrence where people truly love someone who happens to be a completely toxic individual and who you know is no good for you. Not everybody that you love is good for you. And we all know this to be a fact. And so the fact that the person is toxic does not mean, it does not cancel the emotions that you feel for that individual. It does not cancel the love and the affection that you feel for them either. And as a result, it does not cancel your grief when that person is gone. So you do grieve. You grieve people, whether they were good, bad, or in between. You will grieve. It is a loss, no matter how you turn it. It is perfectly normal. Let me tell you what is also normal. It is also normal for us as humans to experience simultaneous emotions. What do I mean by simultaneous emotions? Simultaneous emotions is, for example, I am feeling both happy and sad at the same time as a result of the same situation. Let me give you an example. A parent who is sending a child off to college typically experiences simultaneous emotions. This parent will be experiencing happiness, joy. I mean, they're probably ecstatically happy for a number of reasons, because their child graduated and is off to college. Perhaps they are happy because that child got into the college of their dreams and is about to pursue a career that the parents always wanted that child to pursue. They are happy because their child is thriving and doing well and has a bright future. And so for all of those reasons, they're ecstatic. They're very happy. They're proud parents. Like, they're proud as ever. But at the same time, you see them both crying their eyes out, and you're like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? Are you not happy? Of course they're happy. But they're also probably scared out of their minds because their baby is about to leave home for the first time. They won't be able to protect and shelter and provide for that child in the way they have been doing for all of that child's life up to that point. They have to trust that their parenting is going to be sufficient to help that child navigate college life. They have to trust that somebody isn't going to kill or beat up their child. And we live in 2022. You know that is very possible. They have to trust that their child is going to be okay, even though they're not going to have eyes on him or her 24/7. And so those simultaneous emotions are occurring in the same human being at the same time. Normal, normal, normal. And that I feel like sometimes happens when we are grieving toxic people. You love the person, but you're also fully aware of the fact that this person is no good for you. And it's a battle that's going on in your mind and it happens. It's normal. I feel like people experience simultaneous emotions at weddings also, especially parents of brides who are giving away daughters or sons who they truly love. They want them to be happy, but there's also an understanding that this ends a stage of their lives. This is going to mark a very significant change in their relationship. And so they're happy because they know that their child is happy, but they're also very sad because one door is closing that they have been used to all of their lives. And so this idea of simultaneous emotions, normal, normal. So my dear D, if you're experiencing that, you'll be fine. You'll be okay. Yes, D, that's what it's called. Simultaneous emotions. And that's probably what you're dealing with right now. And you're going to be okay. It's so normal. It's so normal. All right. So let me throw a few quick tips at you for navigating your grief during the holiday season. Let's put all of those clinical terms and stuff aside for now. And let's just talk practical things that one can and perhaps should do if one is dealing with grief this holiday season. Okay. So, one of the first things that I want to recommend is that you set realistic expectations for yourself. That's the first one. The reason why I start with this is because there is so much pressure. There is so much pressure to do what everybody expects you to do, even when you don't feel like it, even when you recognize that you can't handle it, even when inside you are dying, there is an expectation that you're going to show up, that you're going to do certain things and act a certain way and present yourself a certain way. And the cultural expectations and societal expectations and familial expectations are what often cause people to set unrealistic expectations for themselves because they make it about what other people want versus what they need. Bad idea. If you are grieving this holiday season, this has to be the first holiday in which you prioritize what you need over what everybody expects you to do. And I know that that is much easier said than done. I know. But this is what you must do. It may be the first time in your life that you're doing it, or it may be the very first holiday ever that you're doing it. But this is a moment for you to prioritize yourself. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? Rather than what does everybody need me to be? Or how does everybody need me to show up? Or what does everybody need me to do? Like, set some realistic expectations for yourself. And truth be told, it is probably unrealistic for you to think that you're just going to show up like you normally do and feel fine. That is an unrealistic expectation. You are human. You are not made of concrete. And so that is an unrealistic expectation to place on yourself. And so the first thing that you have to do is remind yourself this is not going to be an ordinary year because I am dealing with a loss, whatever that loss is. And let's not undermine any loss. I said this at the start of the program, and I want to say it again, just to underscore that we are not undermining any type of loss here. If it's a loss, it's a loss. It may not be death. It may be an ended relationship. It may be a divorce. It may be a miscarriage. Whatever the loss is, it's a loss. And if you have to grieve, grieve. Give yourself the room to grieve. And so you start by not setting unrealistic expectations on yourself. If you typically have responsibilities and tasks to handle during the holiday season that this time around you just know you can't deal with, say so. Say so and delegate the responsibility to somebody else this year. Do not feel as if you have to show up for the rest. This is an opportunity for you to show up for yourself. This is an opportunity for you to engage in self care. This is an opportunity for you to give yourself the room that you need to grieve. Yeah. So the next one. Now, I know that there is a temptation to do what you call canceling the holiday, right? Cancel the holiday, as in, we're not celebrating Christmas this year. We're not celebrating New Year's this year. We're not celebrating anything this year. There isn't going to be any holiday celebration. We're not going to do any dinner. There isn't going to be a tree, no decorations. We're just canceling the holiday. I know there is a temptation to do that. And there's also the temptation to isolate yourself, to not talk to anybody, to turn your phone off, or to put your phone on do not disturb, to ignore calls, to ignore messages, to ignore people if they knock on your door, you leave them outside. I literally know people who've done this. I might have been guilty of this at some point in the past as well, where people show up at your door and you just act like you are not there and you don't let them in, right? And so you get the idea. The whole idea of canceling the holiday because you just don't think that you can handle it. Now, I completely understand the need for solitude, for time alone. I understand the need to sit with yourself, to sit with your own thoughts, to kind of center yourself and be able to just hear yourself think. I understand that need, and there is a time for that. I encourage you to make time for that, to just be by yourself, to sit with your feelings and your emotions and work through them on your own. There's a time for that. I encourage and recommend that. Nothing is wrong with that. But do you want to be doing that round the clock 24/7 throughout the entire holiday season? No. No, sir, and no, ma'am. That is not what you want to do. And I know that, particularly if you are in the depression stage of the grief cycle, this is going to be a big temptation. You are going to have the temptation to just, I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. The holidays are canceled. But I am here to say that while time alone has its place, isolating yourself more than you should actually turns out to be counterproductive, as in, it actually does you more harm than good, right? You do want to spend some time with loved ones. You do want to spend some time with people around you because you need the support. You need the support. Nobody who is going through a grief cycle should be doing it alone 100% of the time. Not recommended. You need people. You need support. You need a network. You need people to come around to exchange energies with you and help you through your grief. You should not be attempting to do this by yourself. So do take some time if you want to be on your own. I am fine with that. But you also need to create space so that people who love and care about you can support you through the process. You should not isolate yourself when you are grieving. Make time for solitude, to be alone, but also make time to be surrounded by a supportive network. This is one of the things that ensures that you do not get caught in the complicated grief situation that I spoke about a few minutes ago. And you do not want to find yourself stuck in the grief cycle and in a complicated grief situation where you find yourself spiraling down. And instead of feeling better over time, you are progressively feeling worse. That is not what the grief cycle is supposed to look like. And the support of people around you helps to reduce the likelihood that that will occur. So make time for solitude, yes, but also make time for people in your schedule as well this holiday season. So, D, do not cancel the holiday. Don't cancel the holiday, D. I see you in the chat section over there. Let's pull up another question that I see here in the chat section from Saran. Is it possible for a victim of an abuser to have simultaneous emotions too after getting away from the abuse? Yes, absolutely, Saran. Yeah, this is especially true of children. This is especially true of children. I will tell you something. In all of my years as a clinician, it is rare, very rare. I'm literally trying right now to think of an occasion in which a child has been separated from a parent who was abusive and the child did not show signs of distress because they had been separated from a parent, even though that parent was abusing them. This is particularly true of children. They cry, even for a parent who was abusive. Yeah. And so this is the human brain. This is a thing that the human brain does. This is a thing that the human brain does. And so, yes, the short answer to your question is yes. I'm literally like right now sitting down, I'm trying to think of situations in which children were happy to be taken from their parents. And I literally cannot. I cannot. Even in cases of abuse, neglect. And so, yeah, do victims of abuse experience simultaneous emotions? They do. And adults do as well. Adults do as well. If this was not the case, we would not have such a hard time getting victims of domestic violence to stay away from their abusers. Do you know how difficult it is to get victims of domestic violence, particularly women, to not return to the person who was abusing them because they experience simultaneously, they are experiencing both love and affection and fear of this person. And so they go back to a person who they fear and who they are quite sure is probably going to do the very thing that they fear that that person will do. But they go back. They go back. It is a psychological comfort zone for them. It is a mess, but it is a mess that they are familiar with in the case of an adult. And in the case of children, children are hardwired to love the adult who brought them into this world. They they love their parents even when their parents are neglecting or abusing them. And the attachment that they have to that parent does not disappear because that parent is abusive or neglecting them. What happens instead is that they develop an unhealthy attachment, but they still attach. They still attach. It is what the human brain is wired to do. And so both children and adults do this. We I think at some point in our lives we might all have been guilty of this, because remember that abuse is not just physical. Abuse can appear in a variety of forms, even emotional or verbal abuse. How many of us have found ourselves in situations where somebody is verbally abusive, but it may be somebody that we love very much and don't want to walk away from. And so we are experiencing all of the positive and all of the negative feelings that are associated with an interaction like that. And sometimes it takes a while for somebody to disengage from that kind of connection. That is why trauma bonds are a thing. Trauma bonds are a thing because human beings bond to people who cause them trauma. Is that not crazy? But it happens. It happens. And you find people running back to people who caused them harm, constantly caused them harm. And they keep going back and asking themselves, why is it that they cannot walk away and why it is so difficult to walk away? And so this is one of the strange things that the human brain does and that we actually have to be intentional about counteracting, right? Okay, so let's go back to the tips because we are quickly coming up on the top of the hour. We want to try and wrap up in an hour today. Um, Another tip that I want to throw at you is that you have to, during the holiday season, you have to give other people an opportunity to grieve the way they want to grieve. I've had many conversations with persons who cannot allow themselves to laugh or smile or celebrate because somebody that they love is no longer with them. They will not give themselves permission to feel any happiness or any joy or any emotion that is celebratory. They feel like it is somehow a desecration of that person's memory. It feels like they are betraying that person. It's a betrayal somehow, and that they are supposed to remain sad all the time because that is what is required. I am here to release you from that burden. Let me say that again. I am here to release you from that burden. There is no rule that requires you to remain somber and serious and sad forever because the loved one is no longer there. As a matter of fact, it is a good thing for you to think of what that loved one would want you to be doing this holiday season. Would that loved one want you to be sitting around crying for the entire time, or would they prefer to see you happy? Would they want to see you smiling? Would they want to see you moving forward with your life? Would they want to see you cherishing their memory but creating new ones? These are the questions that I encourage people to ask themselves. And this allows you to give yourself permission to be happy again. Because a lot of people who are grieving also live with guilt that if they start feeling happiness again, that they are somehow betraying that person that they lost. It is not betrayal. It is not betrayal. What it is acceptance. And we need to be able to differentiate between the two. When you begin to feel like you can laugh and smile again, when you begin to feel like you can celebrate again, it is acceptance trying to make its way into your soul. And when that acceptance is trying to make its way into your soul, what you are not to do is to lock up the door so that the acceptance can't get in, so that you can remain sad for as long as possible. That is not the goal here. Mm-mm. Remember that grief has stages, and stage 5 is acceptance. Stage 5 is acceptance. That means that if you feel acceptance starting to flow in, and you're starting to feel good again, and you're starting to laugh again, and smile again, and celebrate again, it means that you are beginning to step into that acceptance phase. It's not that you have forgotten your loved one. It's not that you have stopped grieving for your loved one. Remember what we said earlier in today's broadcast, that you will always grieve your loved one. You will never forget them. And 50 years from now, you may remember them and still shed a tear. That is grief, but it is not dysfunctional, unhealthy grief. That is what acceptance looks like. You move forward. You continue to live. You have new experiences and new memories, and you continue to go on and live a happy, healthy, functional, satisfying, fulfilled life. And all of that is being built around that grief. And that grief stays there because the memory of your loved one stays there. And you're never ever going to be happy that they're not there. Like, there's not going to be a day when you're like, I'm so glad that person isn't here. Like, no, that is not a thing. Nobody has ever said that. And so the grief will stay, but it is not going to be a painful grief because you would have reached acceptance. And acceptance looks like you understanding this person is no longer here, but my life can go on and I can be happy even though they are not here. Okay, I want to pause and look at the comment section very quickly. Let's see. Saran says, a psychologist I follow calls this the smell in the room, going back to a toxic or abusive situation because it's familiar and what the person knows. I love that. A smell. I love that. I feel like I'm going to steal that. A smell in the room. Yes. I feel like that's an amazing description. Yes, it is. The clinical term is a psychological comfort zone, but that's exactly what it is. It's like a familiar smell, literally. We call it a psychological comfort zone because it's a comfort zone in your head. It's not necessarily physically comfortable because, like I said, it might be a situation where you're being abused. But a lot of women go back to abusive situations, and we are confused by that. Why would she go back? She knows what's going to happen because it's familiar. It's a messy situation, but it is a situation that she perhaps has been navigating for a decade of her life. It is familiar. She knows all of the ins and the outs of that situation. She knows how to navigate it because she's been navigating it for how many ever years. And that makes it a comfort zone. Don't be fooled by the fact that it's called a comfort zone. The fact that it's called a comfort zone does not indicate that it is a comfortable situation. It just indicates that you are comfortable there. And some people are very comfortable in their mess. because it is their mess and they've been there for a long time and they are familiar with that mess and they know how to navigate that mess. They know every corner of that mess. And so they are comfortable there. That makes it a psychological comfort zone. I know I'm in a mess, but this is my mess and I know how to navigate it. I've been here for 10 years. I'll be okay. Right? And so it kind of is like the smell in the room. You know, when you've been in a room for a long time and there is a smell in there, even a bad smell, and because you have been there for so long, you can no longer smell it. It's almost like that. But anybody who has never been in that room, from the moment they step in, they're going to be like, oh my God, it smells awful in here. And you'll be like, I can't smell anything. It's a comfort zone. It's unfortunate, but also very normal. Yep. Uh, Another comment, you should read the story of Lauren Kavanaugh, the girl in the closet. That story is wild. Oh, Saran, don't give me another book to read. Now you're gonna now you have my curiosity piqued. Not not another book to read, Saran. I have so many other books to read already. I'll add this to my list. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pierre. Thank you very much for being here. Um, Saran, stop giving me books to read, please. Stop. I'm going to message you after because you know I'm going to write these down. All right, so let's wrap up. Let's wrap up today's broadcast. Two other things that I want to add very quickly before I end today. Two more things. First, where it comes to traditions and rituals, this can be a very, very difficult part of the holiday season for persons who are dealing with grief. Why? Because often our rituals and our traditions are wrapped up around our loved ones. There is somebody who typically does X and somebody who typically does Y. And if that person is no longer there, whatever that ritual or tradition is going to be impacted by that. Everybody's going to be like, oh, but so and so always did this and now they're not here. What are we going to do? Right. And so our holiday rituals and traditions tend to be really heavily impacted by grief and loss. And sometimes we have to build new traditions. And so I wanted to touch on that and just kind of encourage people to build new traditions. It's okay. This is also not a desecration of the memory of this person. If they are not there and there is another person who can step into the role that they once filled, then let it be so. It's okay to build new traditions. It's okay to do a new thing a new way. And it's also okay to maintain traditions, but just add a twist or make a change, because in maintaining traditions you are actually honoring that individual. And so maintaining traditions but twisting or changing something or tweaking it so that it continues to work for the family is also fine. There is no reason to cancel traditions, and there is also no reason to feel like you have to be rigid with your traditions either. The point is, do not be afraid of change. Do not be afraid to tweak something and change something. Also, don't be afraid to cancel a tradition either. Do what works for you. Do what works for you. Like I said, I like to tell people, ask yourself the questions. What would that loved one want to see me doing this holiday season? Would that loved one want to see me sitting here all day crying? Or would they want me to get up and go be with the family and honor their memory and honor the relationship that we had by following through with all of the amazing traditions that we have had for all of these years? Like, these are important questions to ask yourself. Would this person want me to completely stop my life because they are no longer here? And usually the answer to that question is no. So these are conversations that you would want to have with yourself as you go through your grief cycle so that you can over time begin to push through whatever stage of grief you are in until you do eventually reach that stage of acceptance. And you will, as long as you are doing what I'm going to say last here. And this is my final point for tonight. And that is, while you are grieving, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself while you are grieving. This is so very important. Do not self medicate. What do I mean by self medicating? Do not try to drown your feelings and drown your pain with any type of substance, alcohol, smoking, other types of drugs, whether legal or not. This is what I mean by self medicating. And there is a great temptation to self medicate when one is grieving, because grief can be painful. Let's not be in denial about that. Grief is painful, and there will be moments when you will feel real excruciating pain as you grieve. I encourage people not to self medicate during these times. It is never a good idea. The temptation will be strong, but don't do it. Try instead to do the very opposite and take care of yourself. D, I see you posting a glass of wine in my chat section. I'm not saying you can't have a glass of wine, D. You can, but don't overdo it. And you know, we all know when we are self medicating versus when we're just having a glass of wine. We know when we have gone past our limit. We know when we're having a glass of wine just to wind down versus drinking to drown whatever emotions we are experiencing. Don't do that. Don't self medicate, whether with wine or anything else. Instead, take care of yourself. I recommend things like journaling. That's a great outlet for grief. That's a great outlet for emotions in general. I also recommend exercise. Yes, D. Get on your bicycle and go for a ride. Exercise helps your body to release feel good hormones that help you to push through your grief as well. In other words, find healthy ways to let out that pain instead of trying to drown it. And there are many healthy ways that you can let your pain out instead of keeping it bottled up inside and trying to repress it or just drown it with substances. Take care of yourself while you grieve, even during the holidays. Okay? All right. I'm going to leave it here for tonight. I'm going to wrap it up. We are 9 minutes after the top of the hour. I was trying to keep tonight's broadcast to 1 hour. Didn't quite succeed with that, but that's okay. I want to say thank you to those of you who have been listening and watching wherever you happen to be. Thank you so much for being here with me. And thank you for continuing to support the Always a Queen, the Metamorphosis platform. I truly appreciate you. There would be no platform without you, by the way. So thank you so much for being here. And of course, as I said at the start, this is a series of broadcasts that I decided to do to tackle some of the issues that people deal with during the holiday season that nobody talks about because it's painful or because we're just not used to it and we don't know how to navigate these topics. Perhaps sometimes we think it might be easier to just not talk about them. And so I decided to create a space for us to actually unpack these things this holiday season so that as we go into this holiday season, we can go in prepared and also just a little bit healthier and a little bit stronger. So I hope that you will join me for the next 3 sessions. Next week, Sunday, I will be back at the same time for part 2 of this holiday series. And I'm going to be talking about setting boundaries during the holiday season. That's also something that people struggle with tremendously because you are surrounded by family during the holidays, and people can often say the most inappropriate and insensitive things to you, and you feel kind of just obligated to sit there and take it because uh, that's just how it is during the holidays, right? And so let's come back next Sunday and talk a little bit about what setting boundaries during the holiday season might look like for us. All right, next Sunday, same time, same place. Um, in the meantime, of course, I'm going to leave you with love and light. I see I'm trying to wrap up my broadcast. Why are you? D says, uh oh, wrong comment. D says, thanks for the $3.99 therapy session. You are welcome, D. You're too much. All right. So let's leave it at that. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much for being here, to all of you. I leave you all with love and light. And remember to be a beautiful week. Bye, everyone.